The morning sun peeked through the blinds of the police academy office as Dr. Regina Wells straightened the photos on her desk one last time. 20 years of memories lined the walls: her graduation from the academy, receiving her doctorate in criminal justice, countless community outreach events, and moments with fellow officers who had become family. But today was different. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter. She picked up the letter that had arrived last week, the official appointment as the first black female police chief of Millbrook City. The weight of this achievement wasn't lost on her. Growing up in a small apartment above her parents' grocery store, she had watched her father handle shoplifters with compassion rather than confrontation. "Everyone has a story," he would say, teaching her that understanding people was more powerful than judging them. The mayor's office had chosen to keep her appointment quiet until the formal announcement in 2 days. As Regina sat in her chair, memories flooded back: her first day as a rookie officer, walking the beat in the rain, the nervous excitement of her first arrest, and the countless cups of coffee shared with her partners over the years. Each experience had shaped her understanding of what good policing really meant. She glanced at her watch: 9:15 a.m. The morning sun cast long shadows across her desk, highlighting the dust particles dancing in the air. Her phone buzzed with a message from the mayor's office. "Final announcement preparations underway. Stay low until Thursday." Regina smiled, an idea forming in her mind. What better way to understand her new department than to observe it from ground level? Opening her bottom drawer, she pulled out her casual clothes, a simple blue sweater and black pants she kept for community meetings. Her badge and official ID went into her purse, but she decided to keep them hidden. This wasn't about authority, it was about seeing the true face of her department. As she changed, she caught her reflection in the window. At 45, her face showed the wisdom of her years on the force, but her eyes still held the same determination that had driven her since day one. Her mother's words echoed in her mind: "Change doesn't come from titles, baby. It comes from understanding." The academy halls were quiet as she made her way out. Officer Chen, a young rookie instructor, gave her a curious look as she passed by in civilian clothes. "Taking a personal day, Dr. Wells?" he asked. She just smiled and nodded, keeping up the casual appearance. If only he knew. In the parking lot, she bypassed her usual spot and headed for her personal car, a modest blue sedan that blended in with city traffic. Her plan was simple: spend the next 2 days walking the streets of Millbrook, visiting different neighborhoods, and observing her officers in action. No badges, no ceremony, just real police work as the citizens experienced it. As she drove through the city streets, Regina reflected on the challenges ahead. Millbrook wasn't a large city, but it had its share of problems. Community trust needed rebuilding, especially in minority neighborhoods. Training protocols needed updating. And somewhere in those police stations she'd soon be leading, there were officers who might not be ready for a black woman as their chief. She parked near downtown and began walking, blending in with the morning crowd. Street vendors were setting up their carts, store owners unlocking their shops, and kids heading to school. A patrol car drove by, and Regina watched as the officers inside nodded to pedestrians, small gestures that could build or break community trust. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her sister. "You ready for this?" Regina typed back quickly. "Been ready my whole life." And it was true. Every step of her career had prepared her for this role, from walking beats to earning her doctorate, from handling difficult arrests to building community programs. The city was waking up around her, and with it, the weight of her responsibility grew. But Regina wasn't worried. She had learned long ago that the best leaders don't just give orders, they understand their people. And over the next 2 days, that's exactly what she planned to do. What she didn't know then was that this decision to observe her department undercover would lead to one of the most significant moments in Millbrook's police history. But for now, she was just another face in the crowd, watching, learning, and preparing to bring the change her city needed. The morning stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities. Regina pulled out her small notebook, a habit from her detective days, and began jotting down observations. Every interaction between officers and citizens, every patrol pattern, every small detail mattered. Because soon, very soon, she would have the power to turn these observations into real change. Little did she know that in just a few hours, an incident would unfold that would test everything she believed in and set the stage for a transformation nobody saw coming. The evening air had grown crisp as Regina walked out of her third community meeting of the day. She had spent hours listening to local business owners discuss their concerns about downtown security, taking mental notes while keeping her soon-to-be position under wraps. The sun had already set, painting the sky in deep purples and blues, while street lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Her feet ached from walking all day, but she couldn't help feeling satisfied. She'd witnessed dozens of interactions between her future officers and the public, some good, some needing improvement, all valuable insights for the changes she planned to implement. Checking her watch, she decided to make one final loop around the business district before heading home. The streets were quieter now, with most shops closing for the night. A few restaurants still buzzed with dinner crowds, their warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Regina paused to buy a cup of coffee from a street vendor who had become a neighborhood fixture over the years. As she waited for her drink, she noticed 2 patrol cars cruise by, standard evening protocol for this area. That's when she heard it, the sound of breaking glass followed by shouts coming from around the corner. Regina's 2 decades of police instincts kicked in automatically. She set down her coffee and moved toward the noise, staying alert but careful not to rush in without assessing the situation. As she rounded the corner, she saw the source of the commotion. The front window of Lee's Electronics had been smashed. 2 young men burst out of the broken storefront, carrying what looked like boxes of merchandise. They sprinted past Regina, nearly knocking her over in the haste. She steadied herself against a lamppost, quickly taking mental notes of their appearances and direction of travel, information she knew would be crucial for the responding officers. The store's alarm pierced the evening air, and within minutes, police sirens wailed in the distance. Regina stood her ground, knowing she could provide valuable witness information. She reached for her phone, planning to call the precinct directly, when the first patrol car screeched to a halt nearby. The scene that unfolded next seemed to move in slow motion. 2 officers jumped out of their car, weapons drawn. But instead of pursuing the actual perpetrators, their attention locked onto Regina. She realized with a sinking feeling that she perfectly matched the generic description being broadcast over their radios. Black suspect, dark clothing, standing near the scene. "Hands where we can see them," the first officer shouted, his flashlight beam blinding her. Regina immediately raised her hands, her years of training kicking in. She knew exactly how to handle this situation. Stay calm, speak clearly, move slowly. But something in the officer's stance told her this wouldn't be a routine interaction. "Officers, I'm a witness," she began, keeping her voice steady and professional. The suspects ran west on Madison Avenue. "They're both wearing. Stop talking and turn around." The second officer cut her off, advancing quickly. Regina could hear the tension in his voice, the kind that could make a situation escalate quickly. She knew that tone well. She'd trained countless officers on how to manage it. More patrol cars arrived, their red and blue lights painting the street in alternating colors. The gathering crowd of onlookers pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Regina noticed the store owner, Mr. Lee, trying to tell the officers something, but they were too focused on her to listen. She moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible. "Officers, if you'll allow me to reach into my purse, I can show you my identification. I'm a law enforcement." "On your knees. Now." The command came sharp and loud, drowning out her explanation. Regina felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from the bitter irony of the situation. In less than 48 hours, she would be these officers' chief, but right now she was just another suspect to them. As she carefully knelt on the cold pavement, Regina made a mental catalogue of every procedure being violated, every opportunity for de-escalation being missed. She could have pulled rank, could have revealed her identity immediately. But something told her to let this play out. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been in this position without the protection of a badge. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists, cold and tight. Above her, she could hear the officers calling in the arrest, could hear the growing murmurs of the crowd. Mr. Lee was still trying to speak up, his voice getting more insistent. No, you've got the wrong person." She was helping. As they led her toward the patrol car, Regina caught her reflection in the broken store window. The sight was surreal. Her, the incoming police chief, being arrested outside a burglarized store she'd tried to help protect. But beneath the surreal nature of it all, she felt a fierce determination growing. This moment, this mistake, would become the catalyst for real change. The actual burglars were long gone now, disappearing into the maze of city streets, while the officers focused their attention on the wrong person. Regina knew this would be a hard lesson for her department to learn, but sometimes the most powerful teaching moments come from the most uncomfortable situations. As the patrol car door closed behind her, Regina took a deep breath. In less than 12 hours, this incident would shake the entire department to its core. But for now, she sat quietly, watching her city pass by through the window, already planning how to turn this unfortunate event into an opportunity for transformation. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed overhead as Regina sat handcuffed to the processing desk. She watched officers bustling around, some throwing curious glances her way. The irony wasn't lost on her. This building would be her command center in less than 2 days. Right now, though, she was just another person in custody, watching the system work exactly as she'd feared it sometimes did. Officer Thompson, who had arrested her, stood at a nearby desk filling out paperwork. His partner, Officer Martinez, paced nearby, occasionally speaking into his radio. Regina noticed the slight tremor in Thompson's hands as he wrote, the way Martinez kept checking his watch. They were nervous, though they didn't yet know why. Name? Thompson asked without looking up from his form. Dr. Regina Wells, she responded calmly. She saw his pen pause for just a moment, perhaps noting the title, before continuing to write. Occupation. His tone remained mechanical, detached. Regina took a deep breath. Law enforcement. 20 years of service. Now Thompson did look up, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. Martinez stopped pacing. Current position? Thompson's voice had lost some of its edge. Before Regina could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Mr. Lee, the electronics store owner, had arrived at the precinct, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to another officer. That's not the person who robbed my store. She was trying to help. She saw everything. The night shift supervisor, Lieutenant Clark, emerged from his office, drawn by the increasing noise. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scene, the handcuffed woman, the nervous officers, the agitated store owner. Regina recognized him from the private briefing about her appointment earlier that week. Their eyes met, and she saw the exact moment recognition dawned on his face. "Oh my God," he whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. His face paled as he hurried over. "Remove those handcuffs immediately." Thompson and Martinez exchanged confused looks. "Sir," Thompson started, "we're still processing." "Remove them now." Lieutenant Clark's voice carried across the precinct, causing several officers to turn and stare. As Thompson fumbled with the handcuff keys, Clark turned to Regina. "Dr. Wells, I cannot begin to express." "Not here," Regina cut him off quietly but firmly. She rubbed her wrists as the handcuffs came off, noticing how Thompson's hands shook even more now. "Is there somewhere we can all talk privately?" The lieutenant's office felt cramped with 5 people inside: Regina, Thompson, Martinez, Clark, and Mr. Lee, who had insisted on staying to give his statement. The silence was thick enough to cut with a knife as Regina stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Would someone like to explain," she finally said, turning to face them, why 2 officers arrested a witness without probable cause, ignored crucial testimony from a crime victim, and failed to pursue actual suspects who were fleeing the scene? Thompson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we received a description." A vague description that could have matched dozens of people in the area. Regina finished for him. "And rather than assess the situation, rather than listen to witness testimony, rather than follow proper procedure, you made assumptions. Dangerous assumptions." Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "We were trying to secure the scene quickly." "By arresting the wrong person," Mr. Lee interrupted. "I tried to tell you she was helping. She was taking notes about the real robbers." Regina held up a hand, silencing the room. In the distance, she could hear phones ringing, radios crackling, the normal sounds of a police precinct at night. But in this office, you could hear a pin drop. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly, "I'm going to walk into this building as your new police chief. I had planned to spend today and tomorrow observing our department in action, understanding our strengths and weaknesses firsthand. I certainly got that opportunity, though not in the way I expected. The color drained from Thompson and Martinez's faces as the reality of the situation sank in. Lieutenant Clark looked like he might be sick, but Regina wasn't finished. What happened tonight is exactly why I wanted to observe without announcing my presence. We have problems in this department, serious ones. Problems with procedure, with assumptions, with basic community interaction, and now we're going to fix them. She turned to Mr. Lee. Sir, I apologize for not being able to prevent the theft from your store. I promise you, we will have officers canvass the area properly this time, and we will review all security footage. Mr. Lee nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Maybe some good will come from this bad night after all. Regina faced the officers again. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I want every officer from tonight's shift in the main conference room. We're going to review exactly what happened, where procedures broke down, and how we're going to do better. This isn't about punishment, it's about improvement. As they filed out of the office, Regina caught snippets of radio chatter about the actual burglary suspects being spotted across town. Too late now, they were long gone, but maybe, just maybe, this night's failures would prevent future ones. Lieutenant Clark lingered at the door. Chief, I don't know how to. Go home, Lieutenant, Regina said softly. Tomorrow's going to be a long day for all of us. Alone in the office, Regina finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the evening's events. Her wrists still bore faint marks from the handcuffs, and her shoulders ached from tension. But as she watched her officers scrambling to make up for their mistakes through the office window, she felt something else too: hope. This wasn't how she'd planned to start her tenure as chief, but sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected moments. As she gathered her belongings to leave, Regina smiled slightly. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of real change in this department, change that was clearly long overdue. The next morning arrived with a weight of anticipation hanging over the Millbrook Police Department. By 8:45 a.m., the main conference room was already packed. Officers from the night shift sat together, dark circles under their eyes suggesting they'd gotten little sleep. The day shift officers clustered nearby, whispering among themselves about rumors of some major incident the night before. Regina stood in the adjacent room, watching through the blinds as more officers filed in. She'd arrived early, dressed in her full formal uniform for the first time since receiving it. The Gold Chief's badge caught the morning light, a reminder of both the authority and responsibility she now carried. Lieutenant Clark approached, a stack of papers in his hands. Everyone's here, including Officers Thompson and Martinez. We've also got the surveillance footage from last night queued up. His voice was steady, but Regina could see the tension in his shoulders. Good, she nodded. And the incident reports. Complete, though Thompson rewrote his 3 times this morning. Clark managed a weak smile. He's taking it pretty hard. Regina straightened her uniform jacket. Sometimes our hardest moments become our best opportunities to learn. She checked her watch. 8:59 a.m. Let's begin. The room fell silent as Regina entered, followed by Lieutenant Clark. Most officers didn't recognize her immediately. They were expecting their new chief to arrive tomorrow, and the woman they'd heard about from the mayor's office surely wouldn't be involved in last night's incident. Good morning, Regina began, her voice clear and firm. I'm Dr. Regina Wells, and as of today, I am your new chief of police. The reaction rippled through the room like a wave. Officers who had been present last night sat up straighter, their faces paling. Those who hadn't been there looked confused, glancing between their colleagues and their new chief. Last night, Regina continued, moving to stand beside the projection screen. I spent several hours observing our department in action. I watched traffic stops, community interactions, and routine patrols. Then, at approximately 9:45 p.m., I witnessed a robbery at Lee's Electronics on Madison Avenue. She clicked a button, and surveillance footage began playing on the screen. The room watched in silence as the scene unfolded, the break-in, the suspects fleeing, and then Regina's arrest. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What you're watching isn't just the arrest of your new chief, Regina said, pausing the footage. You're watching a textbook example of how implicit bias and rushed judgment can compromise good police work. She turned to face the room fully. Officer Thompson, Officer Martinez, would you please stand? The two officers rose slowly, their faces a mix of dread and resignation. But what Regina said next surprised everyone. These officers made mistakes last night, serious ones. They failed to secure a crime scene properly, ignored witness testimony, and arrested the wrong person based on minimal evidence. But they also did something right this morning. They came back to work, ready to face the consequences and learn from their errors. Regina clicked to the next slide, showing the proper procedure for securing a crime scene. We're going to review exactly what went wrong last night, not to shame anyone, but to ensure it never happens again. Because the person in handcuffs next time might not be your chief. They might be someone's mother, father, daughter, or son who doesn't have a badge to protect them. For the next hour, Regina led them through a detailed analysis of the incident. She pointed out each missed opportunity, each procedural violation, but also highlighted moments where better training could have made a difference. The room remained engaged, officers taking notes and occasionally asking questions. The real suspects, she noted, pulling up their images from security cameras, escaped while our resources were focused on the wrong person. They've since been identified and arrested by the morning shift, but the delay gave them hours of head start. This is what happens when we let assumptions guide our actions instead of proper procedure. As the presentation concluded, Regina noticed something had changed in the room. The initial tension had transformed into something else. Attention, engagement, maybe even hope. These officers had expected punishment, but instead, they were getting leadership. Starting next week, she announced, we're implementing new training protocols. Every officer will receive updated instruction on bias recognition, community interaction, and proper arrest procedures. But more importantly, we're going to change how we think about our role in this community. She walked to the center of the room, making eye contact with as many officers as possible. Last night could have gone very differently. I could have immediately identified myself as your new chief. I could have pulled rank and avoided the entire situation, but then we would have missed this opportunity. This moment to recognize our flaws and commit to fixing them. Officer Thompson raised his hand, and Regina nodded for him to speak. His voice was quiet but determined. Chief, I want to apologize again for last night. But more than that, I want to help make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Regina smiled. That, Officer Thompson, is exactly what I was hoping to hear. She turned back to address the whole room. We're going to make mistakes, all of us. The question isn't whether we'll fail sometimes, but how we learn and grow from those failures. As the meeting concluded and officers began to file out, Regina overheard snippets of conversation that gave her hope. Officers were discussing the training points, sharing their own experiences, and actually engaging with the idea of change. Lieutenant Clark approached her one last time. That wasn't what anyone expected, he said quietly. Sometimes the unexpected is exactly what we need, Regina replied, watching her officers disperse to their duties. Now the real work begins. The morning sun had risen fully now, streaming through the conference room windows and illuminating the space where, just hours ago, everything had seemed dark and uncertain. Outside, Millbrook was waking up to what would become a transformative day in its history, though most citizens wouldn't know it yet. Regina gathered her materials, her mind already racing with plans for the changes ahead. This wasn't the beginning she'd planned, but maybe it was the beginning her department needed. The weeks following the incident brought changes to the Millbrook Police Department that few could have predicted. Regina's office door stayed open, a simple change that spoke volumes about her leadership style. Officers who'd never felt comfortable approaching previous chiefs now found themselves stopping by to share concerns or ideas. One quiet Tuesday morning, Officer Thompson knocked on her doorframe, a thick folder tucked under his arm. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been working late, but there was a new energy in his step. Chief, I've been reviewing our community interaction protocols, he said, placing the folder on her desk. I think I found some areas where we can make immediate improvements. Regina smiled, remembering how this same officer had handcuffed her just weeks ago. Now he was becoming one of the department's most enthusiastic advocates for change. Show me what you've got, she said, clearing space on her desk. As Thompson spread out his notes, Regina noticed Officer Martinez passing by. The younger officer had also transformed, volunteering to lead community outreach programs in neighborhoods that historically distrusted police. Today, he was heading to the local high school to speak with students about law enforcement careers. "You know," Thompson said, pointing to a section in his notes, "that night changed everything for me. I keep thinking about how many times I might have made the same mistakes before, but never knew it because the person in handcuffs wasn't the chief of police." Regina nodded, remembering the cold metal against her wrists. "Sometimes we need a wake-up call to see what's been in front of us all along." The changes weren't just internal. Word had spread through the community about what happened that night, but instead of scandal, it had become a story of hope. Mr. Lee, the electronics store owner, had become one of their strongest supporters, often telling anyone who would listen about how the new chief turned a mistake into an opportunity for growth. Later that afternoon, Regina sat in on one of the new training sessions. The room looked different now, the rigid rows of chairs replaced by a circular arrangement that encouraged discussion. Today's topic was community perspective in law enforcement. "Put yourself in their shoes," the instructor was saying. "Every interaction with law enforcement comes with a history, not just that person's history, but their families, their communities. We need to understand that context." Officers who once would have rolled their eyes at such training now leaned forward, engaged. The incident with their chief had made it personal. These weren't just abstract concepts anymore. They had seen firsthand how assumptions and bias could lead even good officers astray. During the break, Regina overheard two veteran officers discussing a recent call. "You know what I did differently?" one was saying. "I took that extra minute to listen, really listen, before jumping to conclusions. Turned out the situation was completely different from what dispatch described." The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as Regina walked through the department, observing the subtle but significant changes. The bulletin board that once displayed only wanted posters and regulations now included community event announcements and positive interaction reports. Officers chatted with cleaning staff and administrative personnel, the old hierarchical barriers beginning to crack. In the break room, she found Officer Martinez practicing a presentation. "Going to the community center tonight," he explained. "Some folks there still remember when I arrested you. Figured I'd use that story to show how we're learning and changing." Regina poured herself a coffee, considering how to handle the mountain of emails waiting on her desk. The mayor's office had been receiving inquiries from other departments interested in their new training programs. What had started as a potentially catastrophic incident was spreading ripples of change far beyond Millbrook. Call came in. A situation brewing at a local park. Regina listened as the dispatcher relayed the information, noting how the protocol had changed. Now that included context about the neighborhood, recent community events, and potential cultural considerations. Units responding, "Remember your training," the dispatcher added. "Assess before acting." Regina watched from her window as two patrol cars headed out, their lights flashing but sirens silent. Another small change that showed respect for the community. Officer Thompson's voice came over the radio, calm and professional, as he requested additional community liaison support. As the day wound down, Regina reviewed the latest statistics. Complaint rates had dropped significantly, while positive community feedback had increased. But more importantly, she saw changes in the daily interactions, officers taking time to know the communities they served, building trust one conversation at a time. A knock at her door revealed Lieutenant Clark with the evening reports. "Never thought I'd say this," he said, placing them on her desk, "but that night might have been the best thing that could have happened to this department." Regina looked at the photo on her wall, her graduation from the police academy, young and idealistic. "Sometimes," she replied, "our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest improvements. We just have to be willing to learn from them." As she prepared to head home, Regina passed the conference room where it had all started. New officers were receiving their orientation, and she heard a familiar voice. Officer Thompson sharing his story, turning his mistake into a lesson that might prevent others from making the same one. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Regina walked to her car. A group of children played basketball in the park across from the station, waving to the officers on patrol. One of them called out, "Hi, Chief," and Regina waved back, remembering a time not so long ago when such a friendly interaction would have been unthinkable. Change was happening, not in grand gestures but in small moments, daily choices, and constant reminders to do better. The incident that could have ended careers had instead launched a transformation that was reshaping not just a department, but an entire community's relationship with law enforcement. 6 months had passed since that fateful night, and the Millbrook Police Department had become almost unrecognizable in the best possible way. The old break room, once a place where officers hurried through their meals, had transformed into a community meeting space where residents regularly joined officers for coffee and conversation. On this particular morning, Regina watched through the glass as Officer Thompson sat with a group of local shopkeepers, his notebook open as they discussed their concerns about recent traffic patterns. Gone was the defensive stance and automatic authority in his voice. Instead, he leaned forward, genuinely listening, occasionally nodding as he jotted down notes. "Hard to believe that's the same officer from that night," Lieutenant Clark said, joining Regina by the window. "He's become one of our best community liaisons." Regina smiled, remembering the trembling hands that had once placed handcuffs on her wrists. "Sometimes people just need a chance to see things differently," she replied. The morning briefing showed just how much had changed. Instead of the old routine of assigning patrols and reviewing incidents, officers now shared success stories and community feedback. Today, Officer Martinez was presenting the results of their new youth mentorship program. "We've had 30 high school students complete the program," he reported, clicking through slides showing teenagers and officers working together on community projects. 5 of them have already applied to the police academy for next year. The room buzzed with positive energy. These weren't just statistics, they were signs of real change. Regina noticed how officers now sat mixed together, no longer divided by shifts or rank. The old barriers had melted away, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Later that afternoon, Regina visited the dispatch center, which had undergone its own transformation. The walls now displayed maps marking community events and cultural celebrations alongside the usual emergency response zones. Dispatchers had received specialized training in cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. "Chief," one dispatcher called out, "you should hear this." She played back a recent call where an officer had successfully diffused a tense situation by using the new protocols. The officer had taken time to understand the cultural context, called in a community liaison, and resolved the conflict without any arrests. Walking through the station's halls, Regina passed the wall they dubbed the community corner. Photos showed officers at neighborhood events, playing basketball with local kids, and attending cultural celebrations. But it wasn't just for show. Each image represented real relationships being built, trust being earned back one interaction at a time. In her office, Regina reviewed the latest department statistics. Complaint rates had dropped by 70% in 6 months. Use of force incidents were down by 65%. But the most significant changes couldn't be measured in numbers. They showed in the daily interactions, the growing trust, the way people now waved to patrol cars instead of avoiding them. A knock at her door revealed Mr. Lee, the electronics store owner from that pivotal night. He'd become a regular visitor, helping to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the business community. "Chief," he said, grinning, "you won't believe what happened today. One of your officers stopped by just to check how we were doing. No incident, no problem, just checking in. Never saw that before you came." As they chatted, Regina's phone buzzed with messages from other police departments requesting information about their training programs. What had started as a local incident had sparked interest across the state. 3 other cities had already adopted versions of Millbrook's new community engagement protocols. The afternoon brought another sign of change, a community feedback session in the main conference room. Unlike the tense, sparsely attended meetings of the past, this one was packed with residents from all parts of town. Officers sat scattered throughout the crowd, not as authority figures but as members of the community. Officer Thompson stood to share the story that had started it all, his arrest of the chief. But now he told it differently, not as a source of shame, but as a moment of awakening. "That night showed us what we needed to change," he said. "And thanks to Chief Wells's leadership, we didn't just talk about change. We made it happen." Regina watched as hands went up around the room, not with complaints, but with ideas for further collaboration. A local teacher suggested police student reading programs. A business owner offered to host community meetings. An elderly resident praised the new walking patrols that had helped her feel safer in her neighborhood. As the sun began to set, Regina took a walk through downtown Millbrook. She passed the spot where she'd been arrested 6 months ago, now transformed into a small community garden maintained jointly by officers and residents. Children played nearby, completely at ease with the patrol car parked on the corner. Back at the station, the evening shift was arriving. Officers greeted each other warmly, sharing updates and insights from their beats. The old military-style shift changes had given way to collaborative handoffs, with officers taking time to discuss ongoing community needs and concerns. In the parking lot, Regina spotted Officer Martinez teaching a young rookie about the importance of knowing the community. "See that coffee shop?" he was saying. "Owner opens early just for night shift workers." Knowing little things like that, showing people we care about their lives, that's real police work. As darkness fell over Millbrook, Regina stood at her office window, watching her transformed department at work. The incident that could have divided them had instead united them, creating a model of what policing could be when guided by understanding and compassion rather than fear and force. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, as she watched officers heading out on patrol, Regina knew that the changes they'd made weren't just policies or procedures, they were the foundation of a new way of serving and protecting their community. 1 year after the night that changed everything, the Millbrook Police Department hosted an open house. The station's doors were wide open, welcoming a steady stream of community members. Children played in the parking lot, which had been transformed into a community fair space, complete with food trucks and information booths. Regina stood near the entrance, watching families interact freely with officers. A year ago, such a scene would have seemed impossible. Now, it felt natural, right? The way things should have been all along. "Chief," called a familiar voice. Mr. Lee approached, accompanied by his teenage daughter. "You won't believe this. My daughter just got accepted into the police academy. Your story inspired her." The young woman smiled shyly. "I want to be part of the change," she said. "What happened that night, how you handled it, it showed me that one person really can make a difference." Inside the station, the walls told the story of their transformation. Photos documented the journey, tense early meetings giving way to community gatherings, suspicious stares transforming into friendly waves, barriers breaking down one interaction at a time. Officer Thompson now led the department's new training division, specializing in bias prevention and community engagement. Today, he was giving a presentation to visiting officers from other cities, sharing their story with departments hoping to implement similar changes. "A year ago," he told his audience, "I made the biggest mistake of my career. I arrested my own chief because I let bias cloud my judgment. But instead of ending my career, that mistake became the catalyst for real change." Regina slipped into the back of the room, listening as Thompson continued. "Our complaint rates are down 80% from last year. Use of force incidents have dropped by 75%. But the real success isn't in the numbers, it's in the faces of people who now see us as part of their community, not apart from it." Outside, Officer Martinez was organizing a basketball game between officers and local teenagers. The same young people who once scattered at the sight of a patrol car now called officers by name, sharing jokes and stories between plays. The dispatch center had become a model for other departments. Their new protocols, emphasizing cultural understanding and de-escalation, were being adopted across the state. The dispatcher who'd handled calls the night of Regina's arrest now trained others in the new approach. "Remember," she told her trainees, "every call is a chance to make a difference. We're not just sending officers to situations, we're helping to shape how those situations unfold." In her office, Regina reviewed a pile of letters from other police chiefs requesting guidance on implementing similar changes. The incident that could have been a career-ending embarrassment had instead sparked a movement. Departments across the country were realizing that true police work meant being part of the community, not just policing it. A knock at her door revealed Lieutenant Clark with the latest community survey results. "Confidence in the department is at an all-time high," he reported. "And look at this. Applications to join the force have doubled, especially from minority communities." The afternoon brought a special ceremony in the conference room. The mayor had come to recognize the department's transformation, but Regina had turned it into a community celebration instead. Residents shared stories of positive interactions with officers. Business owners talked about feeling safer, more connected. Young people spoke about seeing a future in law enforcement they'd never imagined before. Officer Thompson took the podium, his voice carrying the weight of experience. A year ago, I nearly ruined my career by making assumptions about someone based on their appearance. Today, I teach others how to avoid that same mistake. But more importantly, I've learned that our greatest moments of failure can become our greatest opportunities for growth. As the sun began to set, Regina walked through downtown Millbrook. The spot where she'd been handcuffed had become a symbol of transformation. A small plaque now marked the location, not to commemorate the arrest, but to celebrate the change it had sparked. Children played freely in the streets, their parents chatting with officers on patrol. Store owners stepped out to offer water to passing patrol units. The invisible barriers that had once divided the community had melted away, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect. Back at the station, the evening shift change looked more like a community gathering than a police procedure. Officers shared updates about neighborhood events, discussed ongoing community projects, and planned upcoming youth programs. Regina paused in the doorway of her office, taking in the scene. The incident that could have torn the department apart had instead brought them together, creating a model of what policing could be, should be, everywhere. A young rookie approached her, notebook in hand. "Chief," she said, "I chose this department because of your story. Because you showed us that change is possible, that we can be better." As darkness fell over Millbrook, Regina watched her officers heading out on patrol. They moved differently now, not as warriors entering enemy territory, but as guardians returning to their community. The transformation wasn't just in procedures or policies, it was in hearts and minds. The night shift supervisor stopped by for a final check. "You know," he said, "other departments keep asking how we made such big changes in just 1 year. I tell them it's simple. We stopped seeing ourselves as separate from the community and started seeing ourselves as part of it." Regina smiled, remembering the cold handcuffs that had started it all. "Sometimes," she replied, "the best changes come from our hardest moments. We just have to be brave enough to learn from them." As she prepared to leave for the night, Regina took one last look at her transformed department. The incident that could have been a scandal had become a beacon of hope, showing departments everywhere that real change was possible. More importantly, it had shown that sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to the most important transformations if we have the courage to learn from them.